Well, I don't know about you, but this Psalm 23 series has been really good for me personally. I've been in the midst of some year-end craziness, and just hearing those words, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," just chills me out and helps me to keep grounded in the midst of the chaos. It reminds me that when the Lord is my shepherd, I have a different perspective, because now all the crap that gets me all uptight, the stuff that keeps me awake at night, suddenly it's just not that big a deal anymore. Not that any of it has disappeared or gets any easier, but I still have to walk through it. But the truth is that I can deal with it all so differently, because now when I walk through those valleys, I fear no evil, because I remember what's important in life and what's not. And none of the stuff, quite frankly, that I worry about so much, none of that in the end is going to matter. And so David comes to the end of this psalm. He said some incredibly beautiful, eloquent, inspiring things. And he comes to this last line and he says this: "And I will dwell in the house of God forever." And I've always kind of taken that to mean like that's the end, right? That when I die, I'm going to go to heaven and go live with Jesus. When we think of eternal life, if we ever think of it at all, we think of it as what happens when my life comes to an end. In other words, when my life ends, that's when eternity begins. But what if we can think about it differently? What if we're not waiting around to die just so that eternity can begin? What if heaven isn't this faraway place out in the distance? Is it possible that we are living in eternity right now? I mean, what if when David says that I will dwell in the house of God forever, he's not talking about that day when I walk out of this world. He's talking about today, in the world in which I live. The word dwell, when you look it up, it means to remain for a period of time or to linger. When you dwell somewhere, it means that you are so drawn to that place that you don't want to leave. And so you linger there. I linger in places that I love, near a warm fire on a cold winter night. I love to linger at the table after a good meal, or to linger a little longer with a bunch of friends that I love hanging out with when we're having a good time. We linger in those places that we love to be. But David takes it to a whole nother level by saying, I'm not just going to visit the house of God. I'm not going to just hang out there for a while because I'm having a good time. I'm moving in. And when I move in, I'm not moving in just for a period of time so I can until I can get back on my feet or something. He's like, you're stuck with me, God, because I'm moving in for good, forever. I don't think that what David is saying that someday when we die, we are going to go and live with Jesus in heaven. I think that his point here is when he says that the Lord is my shepherd, I am living in the house of God right now. And even though I may not be able to see him, and there are certainly a lot of times in my life where I'm not feeling him, I am standing here in the presence of the creator of the universe, and this is his house. Even though most of us believe that we were created as spiritual beings because of our belief in God, it's nonetheless scary to deal with the spiritual side of our lives because it threatens the way that we live. It forces us to become something different and to stand out against the status quo. Our spirituality is inconvenient and demanding because it takes us way out of our comfort zone, and we can't really deal with it if we're dealing with the daily grind. And so for the spiritual stuff in our life, we just bury it. And we bury our spirituality so far down that it is not even detectable in our lives. And we are content to go through life as usual without even giving a thought to anything spiritual. But every once in a while, life can be so beautiful and surprising. And when you least expect it, something speaks to you so loudly. You experience something that you've never experienced before. And it opens your eyes to not what's possible, but to what is, to what really is. And all of a sudden, you remember what this is all about. Maybe it comes as you're sitting there in the midst of the drama of a sunset, setting into the western sky. Or you're standing there in the awe of a supermoon, which is so incredible to look at. Or you hear the haunting song of a mourning dove on a beautiful spring day that we can't even relate to this morning. It can also, unfortunately, come at a time when, stuff is hard. And we lose somebody. We have a sense of loss because we have lost somebody that is so close to us that we can barely move on. And it's in those moments that all of a sudden we wake up and we go, oh yeah, I remember now. And so we run down into the basement and we tear it apart until we find what it is that we stuffed down there so long ago. And we finally take our spirituality and that we've kept tucked away all these years and we bring it up into the light of day. And for the first time in a long time, you feel fully awake and alive. And all of a sudden you realize, I am in the house of God. Right now. It's all around me. And this is where I'm meant to be. This is who I am. This is where I want to hang out for the rest of my days. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, it says that God has placed in our hearts and minds a sense of eternity. But as we look back on the past and we think upon the future, we cannot grasp the ways of God. God created us with the knowledge that life goes way beyond the realms of this world. And in fact, our time spent here is nothing more than a drop of water in the ocean compared to the rest of eternity. But he created us so that we could know that we were made for something more than just this. He placed eternity in each of our hearts so that we know that there really is something beyond this life. And you can try and stuff it all you want, but you know it's there. You know the truth. And it's in those aha moments that we remember what's really important and really what's not. My Monday through Friday is spent in the business world, and I readily admit that I am the kind of person that I'm very success driven. And I have to fight constantly the distractions of doing the next deal or making more money to get down to what is really important in this life. This week it got flipped on its head where it was an exceptionally bad week, and so I've just had to fight through all of the worry and the stress of dealing with all of the bad stuff going on. But when I boil it down, and I take all of my success that I feel real good about, and I take all of my problems and failures that I feel real bad about, and I ask myself, in the end, what does it matter? Really? What lasting value does it have? Is it something that will make a difference after they bury me? And when I stop for a moment and I reflect and I'm willing to take and have the courage to ask those questions, it changes my outlook, because most of the time what I get so uptight about, in the end, it will not amount to a hill of beans when I'm dead and gone. Not even a little bit. When we truly get that in the scheme of eternity, our existence is no longer than just a blip on a screen, it's only then that we can finally get that to put our hope in the stuff of this world is absolutely meaningless, and it will lead to a life of nothingness. But understanding clearly that I am dwelling in the house of God right now, right here, will not only cause us to understand what we're wasting our time on, but it will also cause us to ask the question, how am I spending my days? What value am I creating here on this earth that will last beyond the grave? What am I giving my life for? Is it really worth it? And so there becomes this need for a reorg in our lives, where we begin to prioritize that which is important and that which is not, and we begin to create a proper perspective about our days, about our time, about who we are, and who we want to become. In the Gospel of John, chapter 15, Jesus says this, "I am the vine, and you are the branches. And if a man remains in me, and I in him, he will bear much fruit. But apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not remain in me, he's like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned." There is just this in-your-face reality that Jesus throws at us here. And he says, look, you can try to do it on your own. You're free to do anything you want with your life. I've created you with that free will. But if you choose a life that is apart from me, you will be wasting your life like a dead branch that is eventually picked up and thrown into the fire. Now, I am no theologian, but I'm guessing that's a hell reference right there. And so I think that what we have to figure out is, how do we get all the stuff that is a waste of time in our lives? And there is just so much of it. Some is unavoidable. There's like necessary stuff that you have to deal with in the daily grind, but how do we prioritize so that we can create capacity for that which has meaning? The emptying out part of our lives can be the hardest part of the Christian life, I think. The letting go of all the junk that we pursue that has no meaning. It's the painful process of the cutting away of all of our desires for the wrong stuff in this world so that we can create capacity for the right stuff and be filled with this passion and the presence of God. Because when you run out of space for God, because your life is filled with the wrong stuff, God stops flowing into your life because there's just no room for him in your life. Because we say, we're too busy, God. I have too much going on. I'll get to it in the someday of my life. And we become disconnected once again from anything spiritual. In these verses in the Gospel of John, there is a lot jammed up in what Jesus is saying here. But in my mind, the one word that stands out in these verses more than any other word is the word remain. And it has the idea that if we stay connected to Jesus, then he will stay connected to us. But notice, though, he puts the onus on us. He's not forcing himself upon us, right? For us to stay connected to him, he says, if we remain in him, then he will remain in us. So how do we remain in him? That word that is used there for remain can be translated from the original language to linger, to stay put, or to hang around. Sound familiar? It feels like he's talking about the same concept that King David was talking about a couple thousand years before that, when he was talking about dwelling in the house of God. Most of the time, there is no wow factor when it comes to our walk with God. No big wave of emotion that causes some big spiritual epiphany. No miracles usually. It's just plain old making a choice to remain. To just remain in him. Walking every day in Jesus. Waking up every day in the house of God. 90% of the Christian faith is just showing up. Being consistent, doing whatever it is that God asks us to do. Take church, for example. God created the church so that we could remain. And so showing up on Sunday mornings, not because you're going to go to hell if you don't show up at church, but because this is a place where we connect with God on a weekly basis, and it helps us to remain in him. It's about showing up during the time of worship that we have together. It's not about having pretty music or singing real good, because I've heard most of you. But it's about getting lost in the moment where we are worshiping him, we are remaining in him, we are lingering in his presence. It's about showing up during the offering time and living a generous life and understanding the connection that is to strengthening our faith and the letting go of the stuff of this world. It's about showing up at a community group where there's a group of people that are all struggling to remain in him. It's about serving in a ministry and doing things that go out of our comfort zone and spending time in prayer and reading the Bible. Every time we show up, we are lingering in the presence of God. And without even knowing it, filling ourselves up with the stuff of God, with the stuff that actually matters in this world. And it's not just one of those things that contributes to our spiritual awakening and growth. It's all of it. It's the whole package. It's a lifestyle that we take on because we want to remain in Him. We want to stay connected and be awake and alive spiritually. We want to linger there in the stuff of God because we love being there. And I will dwell in the house of God forever. When you dwell in the house of God, you'll become a person that people just want to hang around because you're such a blessing to their life. You're no longer leading a selfish or narcissistic lifestyle. Goodness and mercy are following you around like you can't shake them. And you can't help but make a difference in the lives of other people because you are radiating the grace and mercy of God. If you are dwelling in the house of God, then you are embodying His radical love, and you're walking so closely with Him as a branch is into a vine that you can't determine where one begins and the other ends. And through the years, we take on His thoughts, His attitudes. We treat others as He would treat them. We take on His image. And if you listen really close, you can hear the heartbeat of heaven pounding inside of our chests as we dwell in the house of God. That's the place that everybody wants to hang out. But I'll be honest with you, as I am with pretty much every other aspect of the Christian life, this ain't a picture of me. Yet. I'm sure trying to get there. I struggle with my own life where I constantly have to fight and scrape to keep my connection with God all the time. I have to work my rear end off to keep all the junk that shouldn't be there out so that I can let the stuff of God in. I mean, believe it or not, the competition of stuff that wants to be in our lives is ridiculous. But out of all the stuff of the world that we could fill our lives with, God asks us that we just fill our lives with just one. The presence of God. I don't have the secret to keeping a connection with God in your life and keeping the spiritual side of your life alive, but best I can figure, it is a constant daily process of the cutting away and emptying all of the junk of this world out like you're deleting junk mail from your inbox. And you're constantly fighting and cutting and deleting so that you have the capacity to fill your heart with Jesus. But just to cut to the chase this morning, just ask yourself, if I knew that my time on this earth was limited, what would I get rid of from my life? What would I cut away? What would I fill my life with? And how would you live differently? Just showing up every day and remaining in Him and remembering those 5 words. The Lord is my shepherd. It helps to keep me on the right path. I'll close with one of the most intriguing men of the Bible to me. And it's a guy whose entire life was summed up in 4 little verses. He gets very little mention in the Bible. But in Genesis chapter 5, it talks about this guy named Enoch. And Enoch, it says, lived 65 years. And then he became the father of Methuselah. And then Enoch walked with God 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah. And he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch's life were 365 years. Then it says, Enoch walked with God all those years. And then he was no more, for God took him. Enoch's age is enough to blow anybody away that he lived for 365 years. I'm sure that if he were alive today that he would make the Willard Scott Smuckers label thing, birthday thing. I'm sure. But that's not the amazing part. I mean, it's pretty amazing that he was the father of Methuselah, who is the oldest person who on record who ever lived, and that's not the amazing part. The thing that amazes me the most are those 3 little phrases where it just says so simply, Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more, because God took him. I just imagine the way that this is written, that there was nothing spectacular about Enoch's life. No miracles, no wow factor. He just walked with God every day for all those years. And because he walked with God here on this earth, there was like this seamless transition where God just took him. Like he walked out of this world right into the next. But there was no change of address. The place he loved to linger while he was here on this earth is the same place that he is lingering now. You don't have to wait for eternity to begin when you die. It's already here. You don't have to wait until you die to dwell in the house of God. You can hang out there right now. I also don't think that heaven is like this distant, faraway place, because I think that there are times that we can experience heaven right here on earth. But I will tell you this. In the end, I want it to be said of me that guy finally figured it out. And he walked with God all the rest of his days. No miracles, no wow. He just remained. And then he was no more. Because I just wanted to linger a little longer in the place that I love. And I will dwell in the house of God forever.